One of my Patreon supporters said to me something that's profound and brilliant in its simplicity. She said, tradition, all tradition, ultimately is a form of pure pressure that deceased generations are exercising over the living. Our ancestors from the past bully us into imitating their stupidity through tradition. We can pretend all we want that the role of the government is to preserve tradition. It isn't.
Quebec's secular legislation, commonly known as Bill 21, is being challenged in court. The bill passed over a month ago. It bans public employees from wearing religious symbols and requires all citizens to uncover their faces when receiving government services.
Premier François Legault has put forward a bill that bans public employees like teachers and police officers from wearing headscarves, turbans, and kippas.
With Bill 21 looming on the horizon, it's a weight on her mind.
What if my daughter, who's 8 years old right now, wants to be a teacher in the future? And what if she wants to wear a hijab like I did in high school? What's going to happen? Will she be told by her high school teachers, oh, don't take this program in hijab, don't take this program in university, you can't be a teacher because you wear a hijab? That's not fair.
The Bill 21 will ban religious symbols on workers, including teachers, police officers, and judges, who would no longer be allowed jewelry, headgear, and accessories worn as a sign of faith.
It is actually quite rare that someone asks me to speak on religion or the politics of religion. In fact, just a couple of days ago, I was having a conversation online. Somebody was asking if I'd ever made a video about a particular topic in atheism. And I had to point out, my YouTube channel, when I started my first YouTube channel, the YouTube channel that pays my rent to this day, I called it À bas le ciel. It was founded as a channel with an anti-religious mandate. And my perspective on atheism is formed by the fact that I'm not an ex-Christian. At the time I created this YouTube channel, I was very much emotionally and intellectually recovering from Buddhism. I was an ex-Buddhist, and I wasn't merely a member of the Buddhist faith in the past. I was also very much a scholar of Buddhism. I devoted many years of my life to working very hard to learning the scripture, the history, and the politics of that religion. I was planning for my long-term career to really be an expert and an academic in Buddhism. And at many points, I considered taking on the full robes and becoming a Buddhist monk, presumably for the rest of my life. So I was deeply, deeply committed to Theravada Buddhism. So when I do get asked these kinds of questions, the perspective I have to offer is very different from other atheist YouTube channels.
Laïcité becomes problematic when Quebec shifts its attention away from dismantling an institution with hegemonic control to limiting the access and opportunities of minorities who are already disadvantaged and at the margins of society. Unlike the Catholic clergy, these minorities don't have power, influence, or control. So there's no reason to adopt a heavy-handed approach that makes it difficult for them to see themselves as equal and autonomous participants in society.
The laws faced wide opposition, with many saying it overwhelmingly targets women who wear headscarves and veils.
I was always raised as a Canadian. I was always raised as a Quebecer. I was always raised as a Montrealer. My identity happens to be Muslim. I became a teacher. How more of an integrated job does the Minister Jean Barrette want us to be?
Second, the proposed law suggests that we're judging people by their outward appearances in the 21st century. It implies that people who wear religious clothing are incapable of acting impartially in their jobs.
I think the misconception here arises from the difference between propaganda about secularism, propaganda about laïcité, propaganda about separation of church and state, and the brutal reality of what it really means, what it always has meant historically, what it's going to mean in the future. And you know what? I'll be honest with you. I'm really more interested in the gap between these two here on YouTube. I'm more interested in how we cope with this as content creators and as possibly activists for atheism than I'm interested in how it's going to play out in the newspapers or in the parliaments. Because, it's an old story. Nothing's really going to change. It's completely false. It's hollow propaganda to suggest that the meaning of laïcité, or the meaning of state secularism, is the equal encouragement of all religions and all faiths. In Canada, in the 21st century, do we equally encourage female genital mutilation and male genital mutilation? To use the common terms, female circumcision and male circumcision. Are those commonly tolerated? Yes, no. How about the Hindu tradition of arranged marriage with child brides? Is that tolerated? How about the theory of evolution versus the theory of the origin of the world set down in Judaism, Christianity, Islam? You guys may not know, but Buddhism has its own creation of the world mythology. Doesn't seem to come. Are these things equally tolerated? No, not at all. The reality is that we live in an era in Canada and Western Europe, not everywhere in the world, but in the countries I'm addressing here, we live in an era when the modern, secular, bureaucratic state requires people with modern, secular, bureaucratic attitudes. And if you don't live up to that standard, you're rejected. You're rejected as a police officer, you're rejected as a school teacher, you're rejected as a judge, you're rejected as a person of almost any significant responsibility whatsoever. And you're only tolerated to the extent to which your religion happens to resemble the ideology of the state. Okay? So most Buddhists have a kind of turning point in their development where they realize this. Like most Buddhists have a kind of early period where they're kind of naive or jejune about their religion, and then they have a period where they get more serious, get more scholarly, learn what their religion really is. And this is true whether you're born into Buddhism or whether you convert to it. You got to work your way through what you think about the religion and then get to grips with the real history and real scripture. What you start to realize when you're becoming more of a serious Buddhist is that the positive appraisal of the religion, the appreciation of the religion in modern Asia, modern Europe, modern America, is not because of the religion's strengths. It's because of the religion's weaknesses. Like, Buddhism in the modern world is seen as a good thing only to the extent to which it resembles atheism. Buddhism is accepted and even promoted in the modern world only to the extent to which it's compatible with the theory of evolution. It's compatible with gay rights. And these are big advantages that Buddhism has over Islam, Judaism, Christianity. But the thing is, once you become a serious Buddhist and you start reading the scriptures, you realize that Buddhism actually does have its own legend about the creation of the world. It's just that nobody today takes it seriously. Nobody insists that what was written in this ancient scripture is more real, more important, or more true than what people now teach in geology, let alone evolutionary biology. Nobody takes it that seriously. The weakness of the religion is its strength. And I could go on and on with other examples, including the social, political attitudes that, modern Buddhists have that in many ways mark out not the purity of the religious tradition, but its greater decay, its greater decomposition in the modern era. And by the same token, the forms of Christianity that are the most tolerated or the most accepted by the modern secular democratic state are of necessity those that don't take the scripture seriously, those that are the most diluted, the most decayed, the most corrupt. Anyone who really practiced Christianity the way it's written down in the Bible would be in prison or would be exiled and asked to leave the country. Something else Buddhism has in common with Christianity and Islam: slavery. Nobody wants to talk about that. Look, guys, you cannot serve both God and mammon. It's a quote from the Bible. You cannot serve the laws of God and also the laws of man. You cannot represent a modern secular democracy and at the same time an ancient legal code, an ancient moral code, such as the Quran or the Hadith. It is inevitable in the present and the future, and several times it's come up with equal inevitability in the past, that modernity confronts tradition, that the ultimately coercive nature of secularism, that the ultimately authoritarian nature of atheism is nakedly exposed beneath this layer of propaganda we've created, where we pretend that the function of the modern professional secular state is to treat all religions equally, to encourage all religions to flourish equally. And that's why I say I'm really more interested in where this discourse goes on YouTube and in terms of activism than I am for how it's going to go in the courthouse and in the mainstream newspapers. The same song and dance is going to be acted out in the formal sphere of the legislatures again and again and again, where it's explained to the public that all the absurdities and evils of religion will be tolerated to the greatest extent possible, and that sagacious, wise old men will sit down in the parliament or in the Senate and will gravely consider the significance of whether or not female genital mutilation is to be tolerated, whether or not male circumcision is to be tolerated. That on each principle, with all due seriousness, it'll be considered on its merits. Whether or not it will be tolerated that there are religious schools teaching children that the theory of evolution is false, or whether the government will step in and force those schools to teach that the theory of evolution is valid. And what nobody wants to admit nakedly is that we're at the midpoint of a process whereby inexorably that coercive role of the state, the coercive role of the secular and atheist government, is exerted more and more suffocatingly over the private religious sphere. There are no two ways about it. Okay? The future of Canada is not going to be the government eliminating the teaching of evolution because they decide that the Muslims were right. It's not going to happen. It's not possible. We can talk about tolerance all you want, but we are at the midpoint of a trajectory that continues in that direction.
What if my daughter, who's 8 years old right now, wants to be a teacher in the future? And what if she wants to wear a hijab like I did?
There are elements of public consultation, and there are elements of public participation, and there are elements of democratic debate, but there are ultimately elements of coercion and even authoritarianism involved in that progress towards a secular state, a secular society. Okay? On a factual level, circumcision isn't just symbolic. Male circumcision is removing about 60% of the nerve endings in a human penis. Okay? It's not just a matter of opinion. It's not merely symbolic. The science of evolution, the science of geology, the fact that the Earth is a sphere and not flat, ultimately, it's not up for debate whether or not we're going to legalize slavery once again. One of my Patreon supporters said to me something that's profound and brilliant in its simplicity. She said, tradition, all tradition, ultimately is a form of peer pressure that deceased generations are exercising over the living. Our ancestors from the past bully us into imitating their stupidity through tradition. We can pretend all we want that the role of the government is to preserve tradition. It isn't. It's to destroy tradition. It's to replace it with something better, step by step.